Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Welcome to the Indian Military History Podcast. I am Vikram Dalal, and today we have with us our friend of the show, Sahil Virk, who is a financial whiz, a financial analyst. He has amazing experience in the field of money, in the field of currency, and has a unique perspective on how money and currency plays a unique and effective role in the field of geopolitics, geostrategy, conflicts, wars. When we think about wars, we don't think about the resources that goes into it. Money is a huge constraint, and how much capability you as a country has depends upon the resources that you have, and that money is a good way to sort of like a tangible way to assess how much resources you have, right? So
Yes,
thank you for joining the show, Sahil. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Vikram, for having me on the show, and it's pleasure to speak to you about some things. Having a different perspective on geopolitics. Taking money as a central role. So yeah, we can start with with your permission, with the history of money.
Absolutely, yeah. So in this podcast, we'll be going through the basic history of money. What is the difference between money and currency? Like how sort of this concept of money and currency has gone through in the history, and how it is being done right now. And in the historical terms, we started off with a barter system, and then we had different kinds of currency. Where we are right now, which countries play what kind of a role in this overall ecosystem, and so that's one of the things that we'll be discussing about. Outside of that, we'll also be discussing, sort of, we'll taking the conversation into the current geopolitical scenario and how things are really shifting in a very rapid pace. What does the current state look like? What does a prospective future state look like? So it's going to be a very open-ended conversation, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts and your expertise onto this. So let's start off. What is the difference between currency, money, and what is the history of money? Let's start there.
Absolutely. So, starting with the history of going back to a couple thousand years, where you did not have the concept of money, you did not have the concept of the current state of financial system that we currently have. People used to have barter system. So if you produced wheat, you used to go to the market, give it to someone else. Maybe he'll have one or two other things. Maybe he'll have a pot of pan that he can produce. He'll give it to you. So it's all based on barter system, what you have and what you can give. And that system went around for thousands of years. Initially it was a good system, but it was limiting system. It was limiting in the fact that you could only trade with the people who wanted the things that you wanted, right? So
Right.
for example, let's say you got wheat and the other person has a sword, right? But you already have a sword, you don't want a sword. So how do you translate, but the other person wants wheat. How does that person buy wheat? He just has a sword.
Yeah.
He needs to go to someone else who has the need of a sword, and also needs to cater to the demand of my demand of what I need. Maybe I need a pot of pan. So he needs to give a sword to a person who can give him a pot of pan, and then give that pot of pan to me. So it's a
Yes.
very complex system.
Yeah. With just this very basic example, we can see how quickly it gets very convoluted. So we can well imagine in a very complex, where the hundreds and thousands of things that countries or entities need at different points of time, how this barter system can get really very confusing and very complex.
Yes.
And that's why we came up with currency
Yes, we came
or
up with
money.
the currency or money. We came up with that concept, and this barter system was stifling the growth. Then came the second revolution of the money that was in form of gold or silver. Why gold or silver? Why not steel or any other thing, right?
Mhm.
Because of two main reasons. Money, it has to have some form of it has to last very long. And gold and silver are two metals that last very long. Iron can rust. Silver can also rust, but it can still last very long. Gold doesn't rust. You can melt it, you can remelt it thousands of times. It's still going to remain gold. So any form. So that's one big advantage of having gold as a currency, gold or silver. Second advantage of having this is the finite resource. There needs to be finite. So let's say if somebody took iron as the currency, you can produce thousands of tons. Then there is no value. How do you quantify? Okay, I need a bag of wheat.
Mhm.
How do you quantify? Okay, everybody has a ton of iron. How do you translate it? That's a long lot of big bulk of metal that you're taking around from one
Right.
place to other,
Right.
rather than just taking one coin of gold or a silver and just taking it and giving it to the person. So
Mhm.
that these are the two things that were required for having a currency.
So here's the question I have now. So like just taking it to the next level, the first example that we had, say for instance, Sahil is a country that needs wheat, and Vikram is a country that needs that provides swords, and then we have another country that's out there, say XYZ.
Yes.
Now, gold by itself is it like back in the days when we went from barter system to a gold based system, was there any intrinsic value or was there any functional value of gold, that okay, gold can be used for this particular function, right? Or was there some use case by which gold was being used? Like why, I guess, outside the fact that okay, it lasts long,
Yes.
gold and silver, what other thing about gold was that it made it into a form of money?
Just because it has the value was ascribed by the people ascribed a intrinsic value to it,
Okay.
essentially. You couldn't from that point of view, you didn't have any industry. So two three things that were there, 2000 years ago, industries that were there. One was war, and the other one was agriculture. That was like 99% of the industry at that point.
Mm-hmm.
You couldn't make swords from gold. You couldn't make agriculture tool from it. So then what's the intrinsic value? Why
Yep.
not iron? You could make both these things from iron. The reason is you can make really beautiful jewelry out of gold.
Okay.
And also there's something called in value that is ascribed by the people.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's not 100% based on logic and pure.
It's just consensus that the
Yes.
all of the parties that were trying to
Transact.
transact with each other came to a consensus that yes, gold is something that we inherently value as a
Yes.
commodity. And
Yes.
it's sort of interesting, and that's why it sort of just happened to be the
Yes.
entity that was used for as quote unquote money.
Not only gold, even gemstones, that they
Okay.
had that value.
Okay.
You know.
Okay, so it was basically like it lasts long and it looks pretty,
Yes.
and that's why it had value, and that became the form of money. So instead of us like having like big boxes of wheat or whatever, we just like, okay, this coin of gold is equivalent to that and that. Okay, makes
Yes.
sense.
Yes.
Now,
And
go ahead.
the central governments at that point, had their own weights and measurements. So that also created problems. So so let's say modern empire, right? They had
Mhm.
their own weights and measurements of a weight of, let's say, they didn't have the standard weights and measurements that we currently have, right?
Okay.
They had their own weights. So this much uh, block of iron, this much is the weight, and this is equivalent to this many coins of gold. So they had their own system. Now modern empire, let's say, had their own system, but other countries had their own weights and measurements. So that
Mhm.
also created a lot of friction. There was no standardization in terms of the weights and measurement. There was no standardization in terms of the value too. Let's say a gram of gold buys you maybe 10 kilograms of wheat in the modern empire, but the same gram of gold, where you have a gold mine in a separate empire, let's take the Greek Empire, maybe
Hmm.
may buy you maybe 5 kilograms of wheat. So there
Okay.
is still value in this system, but there's a lot of flaw in this system.
But you would think that over a period of time that these things would balance out, right? Initially things were like, okay, that if you're transacting between one country and the other, there may be some like differentials in that. But
Yes,
after some time, it will sort of even out, and now we all agree that okay, one
yes,
gram of gold is equivalent to this amount of iron and this amount of like wheat or whatever were the commodities that were being
yes,
uh, transacted upon at that time. Okay.
yes,
So,
yes.
and I'm assuming the whole world or all of the transacting world came to a consensus after some time, or was it still it just kept on remaining with those differentials?
It kept on remaining towards
Okay.
these differentials. Now, the real consensus started coming in terms of turn of the Industrial Revolution in Europe, where they expanded throughout the world, where they conquered many parts of the world, and then they tried to have their own standard system. That's when you had the Newtonian physics came into play. You had the printing press. You had paper was invented. The modern paper that was mass produced, we could invent that. A lot of these things came into that point where you could have that standardization. You had those you had organized, they created in the 19th century, 18th century, they created organization that could make standard units and measurements. And then since they conquered most of the world, they implemented it throughout the world. And it was during that time when paper came into being as the form of the money or currency, as
Okay.
the next form. Yeah.
Before we move on to the paper as a form of currency, I wanted to ask about gold. So now, say for instance, we talked about like all these countries that have been transacting with each other, but back in the days, the whole world was not connected, right? So it
Yes,
was probably a subset of the world that was connected with each other. They were trading, and gold was the commodity that they were using as a passing of value from one party to the other. Now, say for instance, if there's a new country that comes in, right, and they've been doing their transactions based upon their own stuff,
yes,
and now they want to enter this, and they have no concept of the value of gold or any of those things. So in this case, they'll have to first give some of their stuff to a country, get gold,
yes.
and then start using the transaction. So it will, so if essentially if in their culture they don't value gold at all, say it's like a, a country in South America,
And
which
there were many tribal people,
yeah, tribal
not
people
only
who,
across the globe. Yeah.
so there's still, so the first transaction or many transactions for them to just be participating in this ecosystem, they
Yes,
have to buy something or get something that is inherently of no value to them,
yes,
and give something that they think is of value to their culture or
yes,
to their tribe. Why I'm bringing this point is because this sort of like ties in very nicely with the whole thing of the US dollar, because
yes,
that's right, so, which we'll be talking about later.
yes,
But this problem was probably at that time also
yes,
for some of the countries, but the only difference is there was still a huge consensus that yes, we all agree that gold has inherently has some value,
yes,
and we can't just like create gold out of thin air. It takes effort, and that's why it has this value. All
yes.
right. That makes sense to me. So, what was the drawbacks of gold then? If it was working so nicely, why would we move to the printing press or paper, which to me it does not last long, right? It's easy to sort of like transact, but still it won't last long, right?
Yes, yes. Now comes to the fact of when you had gold as the transaction currency. Even at that time you had inflation. Now what many kings used to do is, if they want to increase the supply of gold, right, they used to dilute gold, put other metals into it.
Okay.
Yes,
That
yes.
seems like a scam. That's like a scam right there, right? It's
And
like, all right, this is
yes,
gold,
and
quote
and this
unquote.
this was this wasn't isolated thing. That this used to happen in a broad scale, on a very large scale across empires.
Mhm.
Across the French Empire, the
Roman
uh,
Empire.
all across the empire, Roman Empire, Indian empires.
Okay.
So this thing used to happen. Plus,
This
now
this was their idea of deficit spending at that time, is it say?
yes, yes.
Okay. That's interesting. Okay.
Yes, so that used to happen. Now we wanted there were two things. One was again the supply, right? You wanted to increase the supply as the trade increased. 17th, 18th century trade increased. You needed to increase the supply. You wanted to move to a new financial system. So then the paper-backed currency came. So okay, and plus the one of the most disadvantages. Let's say you want to take a large sum of gold to from England to India, right?
Mhm.
That's huge. That's really disadvantageous to transport such a large amount of gold.
Yeah, it's risky logistically. It is challenging. It
Logistically,
has
yes,
it has its own things. Yeah, so that was a huge disadvantage. Just before we move on to the paper currency, right? If you don't mind,
yes,
I just had this follow up question on that dilution of the gold. I just
yes,
can't get that out of my mind right now. So, say for instance, I'm a king, and I'm like,
yes,
okay, so we are entering into a war. We don't have enough gold, so we just like, all right. So now we have 4 times the supply of gold because I've diluted it to one
yes,
fourth. So I've added some copper into it. I mixed it up.
yes,
Now these are the new coins. What does that mean? Because now everyone would know that this is not gold, right? So then, because that's why the inflation is happening, because everyone knows it's not gold. So what does that achieve?
it would still achieve it because the information flow that we are thinking today, that wasn't the case.
Okay.
you know just take 300 years ago. 99% of the people were illiterate. They did
Hmm.
not know. For them it was still gold. They don't know
Hmm.
the metallurgy of gold or copper, or what that means, or Archimedes principle of, okay, what's the density of it, how do you check that?
Yep.
Nobody knew it. That's the one. That's one, you can say, advantage that the kings had during that time.
Hmm.
But also a disadvantage they also had. There were smart people, even the citizens, who used to do the dilution on their own and then
Okay.
use it.
Okay. I mean,
And there were
I would,
many,
yeah.
yeah,
What?
there were many empires that fell due to this dilution.
Hmm. So my perspective on this is this, right? So say for instance, if I'm a soldier in the Roman Empire and my monthly salary is like, I don't know, 100 gold coins a month,
Yes,
right? And now the empire is into wars. They're running short of gold, so they just dilute that. So now
yes,
they've diluted it to one fourth, and they still give me 100
yes,
coins of gold, but now it's the availability has gone up. So for me, I'm still getting my salary based upon the contract I had,
yes,
but because of inflation, everything will go up in prices. So even though my power to buy things has gotten down, but I'm still, quote
yes,
unquote, technically I'm still getting my salary, which is what
yes,
happens at this point in time also when governments keep on printing money. So my monthly salary, I'm still getting it, but
yes,
it's more expensive to buy those things. So I
yes,
can't really say that, oh, I'm not, that contract is still being
yes,
adhered to in that case, right? So it's sort of a, but on the other point where even individual citizens are able to dilute it, I would imagine that the king or the government functions would sort of crack down on that, because they need to have
definitely, yeah,
monopoly, because
of
that's
course.
equivalent to getting those fake currencies at
Yeah,
this point of time. That would be
and that
equivalent to
that was a
that.
problem throughout, and it is still
Okay.
a problem, and that's one problem that's going to continue. People are
Yes.
very smart.
Yes, it's always a cat and mouse game. Like,
Yes,
okay, all right. So this makes sense. So we went from barter system to gold system, and then we started talking about currencies.
yes,
So so the currencies came into picture in like the paper currencies when when the paper the printing
printing,
press came
yes,
into being. And what you were saying was that, okay, if you wanted to do a transaction between Britain and India, we have to like transport a huge thing of gold via ship. It may
yes,
sink. There may be pirates. All those risks are there. So that's
yes,
why they moved from uh, gold to a paper currency, but it was still backed by gold. Correct?
yes,
Okay.
Yes, it was still backed by gold. Now you had by that time you had central governments, you had central system, you had banks came into play.
Hmm.
So you could have paper as a currency. You need to had so many different technologies that came into being. If 1,000 years ago you wanted to have paper, you couldn't have that. You didn't have the technology. You didn't have the banking system. You didn't have the trade that went through. So all of that came about, and then we had paper as a currency, but it was backed by something, backed by something tangible that people knew for thousands of years that's going to have its value. So what the banks did, with the central banks did, okay, we're going to have 100 tons of gold, we're going to print the money associated with that 100 tons of gold. And if even today, if you look at a note, it's backed by the guarantee of the government that that this holds value. So
Mm.
the paper has no value.
Yep.
It's like a contract. It's like just a contract between the government and you, that it has holds a value.
Mm. Okay.
Yeah.
So this continued till the I don't know, the First World War and throughout the Second World War.
Second World War. Yes.
And the end of the First World War, I think the German franc had a huge mess, right? Because they lost the war, they were made to pay reparations to the
Yes.
victors, and how they paid reparations was basically printing money, which was not backed by anything. So it just went into hyperinflation, and then just
Yes.
like it went crazy for the German people. What I've always been interested by, and and this may not be the topic, but I've always been fascinated that the early 20s, Germany was suffering through going through hyperinflation, and they were having all these problems. But within one decade,
Yes.
they were able to like turn everything around and build one of the strongest militaries, at least in Europe.
Yes.
And then were in a position to fight another world war.
Yes.
I've always wondered how were they able to like turn things around so quickly. Maybe we can have a different discussion, like a separate
Yes.
one around this. But this is kind of a question that always bothered me. S-
Definitely. And or just a small some of my thoughts on that. Uh, the government that came, it was a national socialist government,
Yep.
the Nazi party that's referred to in short form. It was a socialist government that
Mhm.
came. In a socialist system, you could control the means of production. Now it's not sustainable on a long term. Now they
Mhm.
could do it on a short term. Say, okay, you could nationalize everything. You tell half the people would work for this factory, half the people would work for that factory, and that about it. Now, on a short term, they could achieve the means of production. But when you're dealing with a capitalist system, when you're dealing with US, in a long term, in terms of production, in terms of technological development, that's what lost the war for Germany. They couldn't produce those many tanks. They couldn't produce those many aircrafts.
Mhm.
It was just, a capitalist system is a much better form of incentive than in long terms, in terms of rather than a socialist system.
Would you say it was because of the systems, or because there were like so many big powers that were against Germany? Because
Definitely.
the scale of production that America and the Soviet Union at that time was able to achieve, Germany would in never in 100 in 1,000 years would have been able to match that. It doesn't matter
Definitely.
what system they had; it was a capitalist or because it's a smaller country, they have less number
Yeah.
of resources. But
Yeah.
point taken on that. Yeah. So
Yeah, it was
what?
a multiple systems failure, you can say.
Mhm.
Resources, like you had a very good point on resources. They didn't
Mhm.
have oil. They ran out
Yes.
of oil at the end. Russia had a lot of oil. That's what they launched Operation Barbarossa, because they wanted to capture the Caucasus oil. That was one
Yes.
of the major objectives. Similarly, for Japan, the reason that they attacked Pearl Harbor was they wanted to gather all the oil fields in Asia, because US put an embargo on their oil
Yep.
right before that. So that's another factor. So it's multiple system failures. Yeah.
Hmm. Okay. All right. So coming to the currency. So now we are at a paper currency. What was the reserve currency during the First World War and the Second World War? I mean, I know that the Bretton Woods Agreement happened in 1944 in New Hampshire, but what was going on before that during the major chunk of the First World War and the Second World War. How was currency being done?
So it was paper-backed currency, but you had different empires that were controlling it, and you
Hmm.
could say uh, the uh, the pound was kind of the reserve currency.
Hmm.
It never achieved the role that US currency achieved,
Hmm.
or does currently achieve.
The sterling pound.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
uh, so that had that value because of the empire that they controlled. It was
Yes.
mostly about, it was a different system. It was about control of land, and you could force the people to use your currency and take their resources. The economics were completely different than what we currently think about.
Hmm.
It was mostly about capturing land and taking the resources from those people, and nominally paying them throughout.
Right. Britain sort of had control over what, like 70% of the earth at that point of time. So it's easy for them to just enforce a system that is advantageous to their
Yes,
economy and disadvantages to their colonies.
yes,
And then they had to endure the World War. They bankrupted themselves,
yes,
and America, which was sort of like it was 90% of it was not impacted, like
yes,
except for one attack on Hawaii.
yes,
Outside of that, there was no major attacks, no impact on America. So the United States of America was in the great position because they held all the debt.
yes,
They provided all of the weapons to the Soviet Union, to Britain, and
yes,
all of the allies. Now they were in a power commanding position to take control of all these things, which is what they did in
yes.
1944 in New Hampshire in the Bretton Woods Agreement. Now Soviet Union was not a part of that.
No, no. From
Okay,
from what I recall, they were not. Yeah.
okay. So now we are at 1944. What happens after that?
After that, now that's a brilliant period for the US. Now they control the whole financial system of the world. After, you can say, after 1945, 46, 47, the empires collapse. You got the French Empire collapsing, you got the Spanish Empire, you got the Britain Empire collapsing. So the whole world is fragmented, and the only great power that's left, economic power that's left, is the US. And US is bankrolling the European powers, uh, providing them money through the Marshall Plan for the rebuilding, providing them dollars, and they could control. They could they what the US did was write the constitution of many of the countries
Yeah,
after.
Japan, for instance. Yes,
Yes,
Japan and Germany.
even Italy's constitution.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so they wrote a lot of constitutions. They could control the financial system, and route everything through the dollar and through New York, and use their financial heft
Hmm.
after the World War. And that was, that really propelled US into the big boys league.
How much of, so how we all know about Wall Street, right?
Yes,
Wall Street, the biggest, the most important financial hub of the world. How much of this importance comes out of the fact that America was in the place of domination at that point in time, and they sort of created a system that all the transactions have to go through New York and Wall Street, and that made it into this power hub. How much of that is that, and how much of this is just, oh, we are so innovative in our things?
it was, from my perspective, it was 90%. Let's take any other country as an example. You have so much innovation happening in other countries, but nobody could achieve that.
Hmm.
In human history, what US has achieved after World War II, it was only because they were in the right position at the right time, and they capitalized on that.
Hmm.
Let's say, World War II never happened. They couldn't have given. Who would take dollar? Why would Britain take US dollar? For there was no need for
Absolutely.
rebuilding. There
Yes.
was no need for them to, there was no destruction. There wouldn't have been any destruction. Why would they have, go through the US?
Is it safe to say that if World War II hadn't happened, I think, not safe, but I think a good guess, right?
Yes,
If World War II hadn't happened, then the sterling pound would be the world's reserve currency for
yes,
most of the transactions, and
absolutely.
the London Stock Exchange would be the quote unquote Wall Street
Yes,
of the world, and that will have all of that. would have had all the financial power, and Britain
Yes.
would continue to be a superpower and a colonial power till this time also. I mean, I think
Yes.
if we sort of make that guess, it's not far fetched,
Yes.
right? Okay. All right. So, but then after the Bretton Woods Agreement, we still had the paper currency US dollar. It was backed by
Backed by
gold.
gold. Yes.
I think it was like what, 35 US dollars was equivalent to 1 pound of gold, or something like that. I've
Yes.
read, but yes, it was backed by gold.
Yes.
And then America got cocky. It
Yes.
started going into these wars. The entered the Korean War, entered the Vietnam War,
Yes.
and then it started running deficits.
Yes.
So what happens after that? So say for instance, I'm the United States of America. I'm saying that okay, we have all of this gold and all of these dollars. They are backed by this gold. But I'm the United States of America. Who's gonna come into our vault and check how much gold we have, right? And so I just start printing money, and then after some time, it starts to become apparent that well, you're printing a lot more money than how much
Yes.
gold you have. So it's sort of equivalent to that those kings back in the days who were sort of diluting their gold
Yes.
with copper and everything. So America starts doing that during the
Yes.
Vietnam War. So what happens after that?
After that, they remove dollar as the reserve, as something that's backed by gold, because that you limit the supply of gold. You could either mine a lot of gold, you could then print more money. But if you don't have that relation, then it becomes very difficult to finance a lot of these wars. Now what do? You remove that any backing. You keep it free and floating.
Yep.
Now, you keep it free and floating, you can print money. Now, why that worked for US? Now, that's the main question, right? Why did that work for US, and why that doesn't work for any other country? Why did people not think about it earlier? Why did they have it backed by gold?
Yep.
The reason is it's all about demand and supply. That's like we talked about in the olden days. We take a king's example, right? The reason it worked for US was at that time, they after World War II, they were in the pole position. Their dollar was the reserve currency. People wanted the dollar. They could keep on printing more dollar, and people would still take more of it, because that was the it created confidence. After World War II, all the economies, all the world, the world was in shambles. US alone contributed, I think it was close to 40% of the world's GDP. Just
Mm.
one country,
Yep.
a massive amount. Today they are close to 20-22%. So you can imagine the amount of heft that they had.
Yep.
That creates confidence. It's not only about financial systems and all of that, but what confidence? Why not Indian rupee? In 1970s, we hardly even had,
Two 2% of world GDP or something like that. So
yes,
why would also? So I think the global reserve currency status, it a lot of it's got to do with those network effects, right? So if most of the countries already have that and they have been
yes,
transacting through that system, so promoting and propagating that would be easier. But after some
absolutely,
time, people may start thinking that, oh, well, this does not have that much of value. It's not backed by
yes,
gold. Why do I need to? I think that's where they went to the Middle East and the whole concept of petrodollar comes in, right? So now
yes,
they made this agreement with the government of Saudi Arabia that, okay, we will give you protection,
yes,
but in return for that, you will price a barrel of oil only in the US dollars,
yes,
right? So
yes,
that's where the confidence in the system comes in. So that is the 70s, where now a barrel of oil, which is gold had inherent value, and a barrel of oil in the 20th century or the 21st century has a lot of value in that. So let's take it forward, right? So
yes,
now we have the petrodollar that comes in, and then all of these issues are happening. So now, what's the current status in terms
yes.
of world's reserve currency or the USD?
Absolutely. Now, just before that, when you talked about petrodollar, a lot of the wars in the Middle East and why US has so much interest in the Middle East, it's not only because of they needed oil. They have their own lot of oil. It was to have petrodollar, status always available. To make sure US and its allies complied with the US. They always had transacted in the US dollar. Not in any other currency. They couldn't. The Middle East countries couldn't even think of transacting in another country.
Yeah, I mean,
Iraq tried, yeah.
Iraq tried. They were like, we'll start pricing our barrel of oil in euros, and then
Yes,
somehow they got the idea. Oh, well, maybe they have weapons of mass destruction.
yes,
And then Gaddafi in Libya tried. He was like, well,
yes,
we'll try to create our own African currency backed by gold, because
yes,
Libya has a lot of gold reserves. And
yes,
then and then some rebels got armed over there, and stuff
yes.
happened, and then
And
we saw.
democracy always comes there.
That is when you need democracy in that
Yes,
country, because now
yes,
they do not want the
yeah,
USD
yes. You
as a
never
result
need
of.
democracy in Saudi Arabia, but you always need it
the
wherever
yes,
dollars are a threat.
it's hilarious. And some people buy it, like, yeah,
Yes,
we need to get democracy over there. I'm like, I don't think that's what they're talking
yes,
about here, but go ahead.
yes,
People,
yeah.
some folks are naive.
Yes,
But
yes,
anyway, I just.
and people would now understand, how money, how currency leads to war, and some of the wars that has happened in the Middle East, how that that has resulted in millions of people dead.
Yep.
It's devastating for the people. It's so sad, but it's all about economics. It's all about creating that that hegemony of the US dollar. Now, coming to the current system, now US could do whatever they wanted in the 1990s. There were no checks. The Soviet Union collapsed. There were no second power. It was US, and then there was no number two. They could go into Yugoslavia. They could go into Bolivia. Sorry, Bosnia. They could go into Iraq, Afghanistan. They could do whatever they wanted. US dollar as a reserve currency was more than 80% of the world's reserve currency, and the transaction happened in dollars. It was US and, dominated throughout. Now, coming to 2024, what the current situation is.
Okay.
Now, US and the G7, their GDP and the share of GDP in the world has significantly dropped. With that, your influence drops. Now you got centers of power, different centers of power that have come up. You got India, you got China. Russia is rising again.
Yep.
They're still not out of the woods, but they're in a much better position than they were in 1991.
Yep.
You got other centers, and you got different economies. Even though Japan and South Korea are kind of US vassal states, if you want to use that term,
Yeah.
but they're still a large economies, on their own. They have their own interests. They have their own people they want to look after. You got Vietnam and so many Singapore and of course the Middle East, that they have really developed and now want to diversify. Now comes to the status of what would happen now from now on. What the next big thing is going to be. Coming to that, now with the weakening of the global economy, sorry, not the global economy, but weakening of the position of US and the Western allies in terms of the percentage, that they percentage GDP that they had overall in the world. You got different power centers.
Yep.
Now, in terms of these power centers, let's take an example of uh, let's take an example of an African country, right?
Yep.
Let's take an example of any African country, right? Now, 30 years ago, if they wanted food, uh, the only way they could transact the money that they wanted to give was dollars. They give it to dollars. Whatever they had, maybe they had uranium. They sold uranium, got
Yep.
dollars.
Mm.
Purchased food from India, Ukraine, whoever, and that's about it. Now, as the world diversifies, Now they can think, okay, why should we only transact in dollar? We got other choices too. We got another superpower, that's China. Why not transact
Yuan.
in China? Why not in yuan? Now in 2015, yuan was almost 0% of the global reserve currency. Currently, as of 2021, it was close to 3%, and now it is significantly more.
So when you're talking about 0%, 3%, you were saying that back in the days, 80% of the transactions that are happening in the world that were done in the USD, and now and the yuan was like very low in 2015, and it's been growing steadily, slowly but yet steadily, but it's on
Yes.
the up curve,
Yes.
versus the US, which is on the down curve. And I think the last statistics that I had seen was, I think in 2022, US had come down from 80% of the transactions happening in the USD to like what 59% or something like that.
Yes.
The other contenders are the euro, the
Yes.
British pound, yuan is coming up, and yuan could like sort of exponentially go up, right? Because
Yes.
yes, right now a lot of transactions are not happening over there, but once the confidence in that currency starts to build, or
Yes.
if BRICS comes up with its own currency, because most of the world's manufacturing happens in China,
Yes.
and it's creating its own ecosystem. So I would think that when the switch happens, it's going to be a sudden switch. It's not going to be in a like a linear curve where it goes like from 3 and 5 years down, and it's like 6% or 9%. It's going to be like just an exponential one
Yes.
there may be a switch, right?
Yes. Yes.
When do you think that switch is going to happen? Like what would be an indicator that okay, that the USD percentage transaction is at X amount and yuan has reached Y amount? In your assessment, what would be that threshold where that switch may happen?
Absolutely. And I want to make 2 points. Now, one, in terms of the timing, it's very difficult to judge the future. Now,
Of course.
it also depends on Xi Jinping, if he plays his cards right. If
Hmm.
he doesn't, well, he would be relegated towards history. But if he plays his cards right, then China really has a shot. Now, second thing, what I'll see is the cost for the US in terms of printing dollars. Now,
Hmm.
what does that mean? Whenever US prints dollars, right, you had all these different countries who could just take, who wanted dollars. If you transacted in dollars, you never keep, let's say, uh, Japan, for example, taking Japan as an example, right?
Hmm.
Japan sells cars to US, gets dollars. Let's take it gets $1 billion. It sells 1 lakh cars and get $1 billion. Now it's not going to keep $1 billion in its own bank.
Hmm.
It's going to buy some US securities or US treasuries.
Okay.
US treasuries are just debt that the US government issues.
Right.
So they're going to buy that. Now, if you have more countries buying that treasury, you
Hmm.
know, the cost of debt, or the bond price, or the
The,
yield on that bond,
mhm.
uh, that's going to be very less, and it was less.
Explain that. What's a bond yield, and sort of
Yes,
explain that, sort of dumb it down to me.
absolutely.
Think of me as a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old, maybe. Explain that.
Absolutely. So if you want to understand in a simple term, uh, if the US government wants to issue $100 of debt, right,
Hmm.
they want to pay interest, in normal terms, they have to pay interest,
Hmm.
right,
Okay.
to the person. uh, Now that yield can be associated with interest. It's not directly correlated, but on rough parlance, that's interest rate, you can say.
Okay.
uh, you're paying, let's say you buy a 10-year bond of $100. You're going to get a 4.5% yield. That's going to be there. That means per every year, $4.5 you're going to get you know interest from that bond. And
Okay.
at the end of 10 years, you're going to get your $100 back, and
Hmm.
also the interest, 4.5% interest that you accumulated every year. So
Okay.
that's what you get.
Okay. That's yield. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So that's what yield is. Now, more people buying that debt, right? The yield goes down because
Oh,
it's all demand and supply, right?
I
Because
see.
you know
Okay.
you
Yep.
got more people coming to you. They're like, okay, no, I'm just going to give it to 0.5%. Like, okay, yes, sir, we'll take it at 0.5%.
Yep.
But if you got less people coming, so okay, 0.5% is too low. I don't want to. I got other choices to park my money around.
Right.
Like, okay, no, no, sir, I'll raise it to 1%. Like, no, this is too less. I'll raise it to 4%. It's like, okay, now I'm thinking, you
Okay.
want more return for your money, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So yield is yearly return. You want to park your money where you get the most return, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so there's less now as you print more money, right? There's more money in the system, right? There's less demand for that debt, right?
Okay. So the
So the
yield is gonna
yield
go up.
yield going to go up. That means the
The
cost
cost to the US government goes up.
goes up. Yes,
Wow, nice. Okay. That's interesting. So
yes,
at half and okay, go ahead, sorry.
yes.
I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm getting
Yes,
excited about this. Okay.
yes. This is really interesting. Now,
Right.
as of 3-4 years ago, if my figures are right, US used to pay around 300 to 400 billion dollars, less than 300 billion dollars in interest payments
Mm-hmm.
for all the trillions of dollars that they had in there because
Yep.
the yields were very low, right?
Okay.
After COVID, they printed trillions of dollars.
Yep.
That's why the current yield that you see is close to 4.5%.
Mm-hmm.
It was less than 2% just a couple of years ago before COVID.
Yep.
It's all the money.
Mm-hmm.
Every nothing is free in the world. Now it's
Absolutely.
4.5%. What that means is just in the next 2-3 years, currently the interest payment is close to $600 billion that they have to pay every year. It's going to go up to $1 trillion in just, I think, 1 or 2 years. It's going to be very, very soon. So that means significant $1 trillion of your budget is only going into the interest payment. That means the rest of the money that you have for all the other things for the budget gets reduced.
And then because I mean they are the world's reserve currencies, so they can
Yes,
keep on printing. So to pay the interest on that debt, they'll
yes,
print more money, and then
yes,
and then the yield keeps on going up, and they keep on printing more money. So it
yes,
enters into a vicious cycle. That
yes.
okay. So what happens? Say for instance, now the yield is 8% or 10% or some exorbitant number. What happens in that scenario?
The inflation is going to go through the roof.
Okay.
The government would have to significantly cut spending. Now, the biggest thing that the government of US spends is the military.
Yep.
Close more than 30% of their money goes into the US military.
Yep.
They would have to cut that. Now, if they cut that, then that's another vicious cycle. If they cut that, their influence on the world decreases. Now, more countries would say, why should we transact in dollar? Saudi Arabia would say,
Yep.
well, why should I transact in dollar? You couldn't do to me what you did to Saddam.
Yep.
I have another friend, Xi Jinping.
Yep.
I'll interact with him. So
Okay.
that is US is a very in a very critical
it's
state
it's like a
currently.
it's like a ticking time bomb if you think
Yes,
about it, because they have to maintain this big of a military to be able to keep US as the reserve dollar, as a reserve currency.
yes,
But having these like deficits that they keep on having, uh, that increases the yield, and that would make sure that they'll have to print more and more money. But if it goes into inflation, they stop printing that money, their military goes down, and then
yes,
yeah, also it's like a two-way thing that's sort of hitting them from two different sides. Wow.
yes,
Okay.
yes,
So then if their military starts to go down, and then US ceases to become a world's reserve currency, help help us understand that scenario. How does that play out? So now America, just like any other country, just like India or just like China, has to sell goods and services,
yes,
has to create or sell goods and services, and then corresponding to that, they'll have money and currency, and so they don't have this whole. Yeah. So what's going to happen? I guess I'm
Yes,
just trying to. Yeah.
absolutely. And another thing that's related to yields is the the interest rate that you have, right?
Hmm.
If the treasury yields go up, the house interest rates that you have, the if you want to open a business in the US,
Becomes more
everything, the
expensive.
becomes more expensive.
Hmm.
Now, what led to the US miracle, another factor to that is the low yields or low cost of money.
Hmm.
If
Right.
Google, you wants to Google could become Google, you have same everything remaining the same. You have got 10 people in the US who want to create Google, or 10 people in India who want to create Google. In the US, they're getting debt at 3%. In India, they're getting at 10%. See how much money of their revenue would go only to the interest payment. So
Yeah.
the
So
so it's not only about it's also about the businesses that the US is able to create there. The US would become less competitive into
I
the.
mean, US would be at an equal playing field finally,
Yes,
because right now it has been at an entitled state. So that's why
yes,
and that is what led to a lot of the goods and services that it's been able to provide to the rest of the world. Now
yes,
it becomes equal playing field, or in other words, less competitive compared to
yes,
what it has been. That makes the problem even more, because now
yes,
they have to cut the social services even more, because now their goods and
yes,
services are shrinking.
yes,
Okay.
yes. uh you know it's all the whole economy what's gets rattled, even today. If companies want to raise money, they have to raise it at a very high cost.
Hmm.
Now, 10 years ago, well, they could do it at a very low price, but Indian companies couldn't,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, if you think about companies like Uber, companies like
Yes,
Amazon, they were in losses for
yes,
the first 10 years of operation. They
yes,
did not make any money. But the fact that they were able to operate is because of the fact that they had access to
yes,
cheap money.
yes,
They don't have
absolutely.
access to that, and that's why all a lot of these tech firings have been happening,
Yes,
because the cheap money is gone, and now all that the drug that they had, the has been taken out of the system, and now companies have to be profitable on their own merit.
yes,
Yep. Okay,
yes,
that makes
yes.
sense.
That is one big factor in terms of the cost of debt and cost of raising money.
Okay. So now we were at the point where, in the scenario where, okay, US dollar is not the reserve currency. It
Yes,
is an important currency, just
yes,
like the yuan, or
yes,
like the BRICS currency, or the euro. There are many other currencies that have sort of risen to that level
yes,
as the USD, so it does not have the monopoly. What
yes,
happens to the US military, to the US economy, and to the US overall US political system, and the systems that exist within the country?
yes. In terms of the military, like we said, right, they'll have less money. They would have to reduce their footprints. They have more than 800 bases across the world. They could not maintain it. They cannot maintain it. If they reduce, let's say they reduce it by 30%. They would keep on reducing it. Their footprint would decrease. That means their influence would decrease. You would have other players who could just rise.
Yep.
They would have the effect on the economy, like we talked about. You'll have other companies in other countries would become competitive. That would again put more pressure on the US in terms of innovation. They would go down in the innovation, right? Because if you raise money, you could raise billions of dollars. Even a defunct company and a lot of could raise millions of dollars, in terms of in COVID times. Just like Nikola, you may have heard about it. It was a electric car company. It could raise a lot of money because the money was cheap. The US printed so much money. The innovation cycle would get reduced. So now the technological edge that the US has in terms of its military,
It's
you know,
gone.
it's it's gone. right?
Hmm.
So that's going to be a compounding. It's going to be a compounding exponential. It's not going to be linear, like you
Hmm.
said, right? It's all
Hmm.
these factors coming all together, creating a compounding effect,
Hmm.
where it's going to be a lot of problem for the US.
Wow. Would it be say? I mean, and when the military becomes weaker, the businesses are not as successful as they
Yes,
used to be. That's going to create civil unrest within the country, and that's when
yes,
a lot of those problems start coming in. When
yes,
social spending is cut, and then and there are different levels of that, right? There are different levels of civil unrest. We see a lot
yes,
of those that happening in South America,
yes,
a lot of that happening in the Middle East. Historically, the French Revolution happened because
yes,
people could not buy bread, right? And when people do not have anything else to lose, they're like, okay,
yes,
my situation is so bad and I have
yes,
nothing else to lose. That's when they hit the streets, and that's when it creates total chaos.
yes. And
That may
one,
be a possibility, but
yes,
it's safe to say that US will be at a very difficult position. It may be at a downward spiral when these things happen,
yes,
and there has to be some very strong leader who has to come in, or the country has to come together and sort of reassess its priorities to
yes,
ensure that it does not go to the level of the French Revolution or the
yes.
stuff in South America, or the just chaos on the streets, apocalypse, that kind of things, right?
Yes, and one thing that makes the US situation more dangerous than anything in the history is the amount of guns that are there in the US. It's mind-boggling. There are more than 400 million guns in the US. There are
And those are owned by a very small proportion of the people in the country. A
yes,
very small portion own all those guns. And
yes,
at the government level also, like when the Soviet Union broke apart, they had
yes,
all these weapons that were out there. They were nuclear weapons too, and somehow they were able to sort of like make sure that the nukes not go into the wrong hands.
yes,
I know I saw this movie, Nicolas Cage, where he's a gun runner,
yes, yes.
the
That's
Lord
a
of
that's a
War,
Lord of War.
Lord of
That's an
War,
excellent movie. Yes,
excellent movie, right? So in that one, when the Soviet Union falls, it has these scenes where these generals of
yes,
the ex generals of the Soviet Union, or the current generals too, they just like
yes,
selling off all of their stuff to
yes,
these black markets. This stuff, I mean, it happened to the Soviet Union, and it has happened to so many other
yes,
empires. It may happen to the US when this thing
yes,
happens, and it would be a huge problem with a country with so many guns, with nukes, with so many weapons of various levels out there,
yes.
and things may just really spiral out of control. To one thing that I wanted to ask you, what would be the indicators, right? So as we said that the 59% of transactions are happening in the USD. It used to be 80 some like a decade ago,
Yes.
and yuan has been going up steadily, very slowly, and then we have the euros that's out there. And what would be a good indicator that, okay, if the transaction in the USD gets below 40 or below 30, or what would be that number in your assessment?
It's very hard to put that number. It may be at 45, it may be at 40, but one thing I'd say, next 10 years are very critical to see.
Hmm.
If this trend continues, if it continues at the same rate or even slightly less rate, then it's a lot of trouble for the US. If they're able to assuage that trend, make it, plateau it out,
Hmm.
then they're in a good situation. But if this trend continues, then when it may happen, it may happen at 40%, it may happen at 45%. you know
Yeah, I mean, it also depends like what other currencies are out there. Say for instance,
yes,
yuan gets to like 30% or 40%, and if it's gotten to say 30 or 40%, that means that a lot of countries have enough confidence in this
yes,
currency as well. Even though it's a closed country, it's a communist government, but they still have quote unquote confidence in that. That's why it
yes,
would have. So it would also, so not only the USD will have to go down. I mean, it will go down only
yes,
when some other currency goes up. And euro seems to be stagnating. Actually, it seems
yes,
to be depreciating because Europe as a continent is going down.
yes,
and Asia is where all of the growth is in the coming decade. And yuan has sort of placed itself at the right spot to be able to
Yes.
take advantage of that growth. So it seems like it may grow, and it may come out as a strong competitor to the
Yes,
USD.
yes, and I want to make 2 points to that. One is, if China plays its cards right, it's all
Hmm.
about confidence.
Right.
If China attacks its neighbors, then how are people going to have that confidence in transacting in it? That's one big if. Like I said, it's all about what Xi Jinping does in the next few years.
I mean, China is going to attack Taiwan, or like
Yes,
take it in the next decade or so. I mean, that goes without saying. So, do you think that may sort of put that whole thing on hold, or if you were Xi Jinping, would you put the whole Taiwan thing to bed after this whole thing has happened, after UN has become stronger, or would you just do it now? I would think you would want to wait and then make sure that your currency has gotten stronger. It has all the network effects that are out there. So
yes,
many other countries are transacting through it, and then you
yes,
start making it move slowly, like what the US did.
yes,
It came out after the Second World War. It was like, okay, we we are the nice guys now. We
yes,
are yeah, we are the good guys. We'll be there for you. Then all the things started happening for them, and now they're like, okay, let's
yes.
bomb.
And to that point, to that point, US could have captured. They had their armies across the world. They could have captured, taken into a lot of land if they wanted, but they didn't. Sometimes, there are things more valuable than land.
Hmm.
Now, if China has to make a decision, uh,
Ah, I
uh,
see.
Taiwan is a very small piece of land.
Hmm.
Uh,
Well, the
there are
the value of Taiwan is not the land. It's basically a a an entity. I mean,
Yes,
it's a country. It's not a country. However, some folks define it, but it's an entity that's off the coast of China that
yes,
historically has been used as like an aircraft carrier to
yes.
attack China, right? So it's not just a small
Yes,
piece of
of
land.
course,
It
it's
has military and strategic importance. But your
yes,
your point is, like, America after the Second World War was the strongest country, and it had the opportunity to sort of capture a lot more land and maintain and
yes,
create an actual empire through it. But what they did instead was came out
yes.
as the good guys and architected a system that gave them a lot more advantage compared to what that land could have given.
And another point that I want to make is, uh, US does not own any land in Philippines, Vietnam, South Korea, or Japan.
Mhm.
They control them through other means.
Right.
Now, if China wants to build a strong military, and you want to have that, in terms of geography, it's kind of bottled in, right? If they want to have that, they don't want to be bottled in. They need to do what the US did, right? If Why is Philippines close to the US, not to the China? It could be other way around, right?
Right.
Capture Philippines through economic means.
Mhm.
US is not sending missiles over there to capture them,
Mhm.
but they still hold Philippines. Philippines is willing to go on for a war with China, in not in its own interest, give bases to US
Yep.
for US's interest.
Yeah.
Why is China not able to do it? That's my
and
main point.
and your point is that if they are able to get all these countries on board the yuan, and they
Yes,
create a financial architecture around that, then they'll be able to nudge these countries to act in
yes,
the interest of China, and not the
yes.
interest of the US or their own best interest, which
And
the
then,
US has been doing.
yeah, and then China can have bases in Mexico and Cuba.
Yeah, that's
You know,
and yeah, and then what does the US say? That oh yeah, you have attacked us, or you have attacked our base, or
yes,
you've threatened our base, which is off the coast of China. I'm like, why do you have a base for there in the first place?
yes,
I mean, it's like there's there anyway. I mean, I'm amazed by how people are just not able to see this. It's like
Yes.
you had the Cuban Missile Crisis. That was
Yes.
basically the Soviet Union putting in missiles in Cuba off the coast of the United States of America. And the US was willing to go on a nuclear war for it. Like, but they can't understand the shoe on the other foot. It's like, yeah, what
Yes.
that the other countries would also act in the same way. Sort of
Yes,
interesting.
it's all about who is the big person, right?
Yeah.
He's the boss. He can do whatever. He can build his US can build its own logics. It
Yeah.
doesn't have to be logical. They can all create their own
Right.
history, and they can create their own logics.
So the next decade, as you said, is going to be crucial, right? So we are already at the point of multipolarity, right? There are
Yes,
all these other entities or other countries that have sort of come up outside of the US and Europe, and it's going to keep on coming up. And how the US handles this new world of multipolarity, whether it handles it nicely so as to make sure that okay, the US is still one of those strong poles, or does it not handle it well and then sort of spiral out of control, and then just like many empires fall, this happens to the
yes,
US as well. That's yet to be seen. I mean, we can't really predict it, but these are the options that are out there at this point of
yes,
time. Right.
yes.
Anything else that you want to add in terms of dollar, in terms of money? I think we just went over all over the place. We went through the history of money, and then we
Yes,
went into, and then it's a natural process, right, where you go through money, and a lot of those conflicts, a lot of things that we are seeing, is the source of that is control, and the means of control is currency. So it all sort
yes,
of goes into those channels eventually. So
yes.
anything else that you wanted to add in this overall
Yeah,
conversation?
I wanted to talk about the Russia-Ukraine war into
Yes.
this context, right?
Yeah.
Before the war, Russia transacted in dollars. 80% of the transaction were in dollars for Russia.
Hmm.
Today, it's only 13%. Yuan is close to 30 to 40% of their transaction happen in yuan, right? It's a symbiotic relationship between Russia and China, right? China can provide them cars, electronics, all the household goods,
Yep.
whatever you see or here, they can provide that. Russia can provide them
Oil.
natural resources,
Yep.
you know. So
Oil and gas.
billions of dollars that are already taken out of the system. Now, another blunder that the US is doing is cutting off. They have $300 billion of Russian money that they have earned in dollars that they've frozen the assets.
Yep.
Now they want to use that for the war in Ukraine. Now, how's that going to have an effect? It's not the $300 billion that does not matter. It's the impact that's going to create. It
Yep.
is the confidence that the people are not going to have. Now, countries, the other 100 countries in the world are going to think, well, if the US can do it to Russia, if they don't like us, they can freeze our assets.
They can
Why
do it
do
to
we?
us. Yeah.
They can.
We don't
Why
have
should
confidence in
we?
this. Yeah.
Yes. Why
Absolutely.
should we keep 80% of our assets in dollars? We'll keep it in. We'll keep some in. We'll diversify. We'll keep some in rupees. We'll keep some in
Yuan.
yuan.
Some
We'll
in
keep
gold.
some in gold. We'll
Yep.
diversify the asset.
Hmm.
That's what the world is moving to. That's what people would think, and this is going to lead to a loss of confidence.
Well, so here's the question: has it already led to a loss in confidence? Because
Yes.
even the fact that they are having this conversation that okay, that this is a possibility, has started to countries and governments would start to think that well, if this is even a possibility,
Yes.
then we need to start acting right now. So even if they don't freeze the assets of those $300 billion of the Russians,
Yes.
the damage has already been done, right?
Yes, the damage has already been done. 10 years ago, the petro states couldn't think about trading in any other currency than dollars.
Yep.
Today, Modi is going there, transacting and thinking about transacting in rupee over there.
Yep.
You know,
And same
and
with the Saudis.
yes,
They've created the petro yuan. So now
yes,
they are selling the initial concept of petrodollar was that we'll give you security and
yes,
you will not transact in anything else outside of the USD. They have started doing that.
yes,
So things are sort of like going. in that
Yes.
direction already. And with this conversation of freezing those assets, that may have just catalyzed the overall process.
Absolutely. This war has already catalyzed this thing, and we are seeing it throughout the world. People are now. And another thing about these assets is how that's advantageous to the country is that, let's take Switzerland for an example, right?
Hmm.
They don't produce anything. They
Yep.
hardly produce anything, right? Their whole
Chocolates,
economy,
chocolates, watches,
chocolates,
and those
watches.
and that knife, that Swiss Army
Yeah, Swiss
knife.
knife.
Three things.
Uh, you couldn't even sustain a village out of those couple of things.
Yes.
How the whole economy is sustained for the last 200 years is, even
Banking.
in World War I, World War II, is just banking. People
Yep.
park their money. Why do they park their money? Is because they have their neutrality. They maintain their neutrality even in World War I, World War II, which were devastating wars.
Yep.
First time in the last 200 years, they've withdrawn their neutrality
Yeah.
during the Russo-Ukraine war. That led to the collapse of the Credit Suisse. You know,
Mm.
that's their biggest bang that happened. That was one big factor. So the collapse has already started in the Western countries. Now the Russia-Ukraine war has catalyzed that. Now what's going to happen in the next 10 years is very critical. Does this collapse keep happening? Does this stop? Does this US make some smart move? Does China make some stupid move? So what's going to happen? The next 10 years are very critical.
Next 10 years are very, very critical indeed. And yeah, and thanks for bringing that point of those $300 billion of quote unquote the probability of those frozen assets, because that
Yeah.
was such a blunder by having even these conversations. Sometimes I just feel like a lot of these politicians or these leaders of these countries, they're not really thinking about like the long-term strategic impact of what they're doing.
Yes.
They're just like going from one news cycle to the other. Like, okay, does this give
Yes.
us a nice positive news cycle?
Yes.
And are we able to own, like, are we able to own the Russians, those
Yes.
things? It's very uh, it's very juvenile if you think
Yes.
about it. And they are making their countries weaker. And yeah, I think the future is Asia. And let's see
Yes.
how whenever we have two different empires, that like one empire that goes down is coming down and another empire that comes up, there's always this big conflict or big war that happens. And which is what we've been talking about, all the possibilities, and see how that happens in the next 10 years. It's going to be very crucial,
Yes.
as you said. All right. Let's. I think this was a good discussion. Let's call it an end over here.
Yeah.
Sahil, thank you so much for joining. This was an amazing conversation. I had my mind blown so many times in this conversation. This is awesome. So thanks for educating me, and and I hope this is very useful for the audience. I hope you also enjoyed this conversation as well.
Yes.
And just for all the listeners, please follow Sahil. All of the Instagram, the Twitter link, and everything will be in the description of the video. And so please follow Sahil. He has really great insights and things. Sahil, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Vikram.
Take care. Bye.